All right, so we've all heard it, right? 1 Corinthians 13. It's the go-to love chapter, the beautiful poem that gets read at pretty much every wedding. But here's the thing. The truth is, its original purpose was way more urgent and, honestly, a lot less romantic. Yeah, these words, they're so familiar. Love is patient, love is kind. It's kind of burned into our brains as this perfect, poetic idea of love. But, and this is the crazy part, the people who first heard this, they didn't hear a poem. Not at all. They heard a direct, and I mean direct and super urgent correction.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're digging into today. What if this beautiful poem was actually a tool for crisis management? What if this wasn't just a nice description of love, but a full-on intervention into a community that was just completely falling apart?
So, to really get chapter 13, we've got to understand the total social chaos it was written to fix. We need to take a trip back in time, to ancient Corinth. Now, this church in Corinth, it was not a peaceful, happy place, not even close. Think of it more like a pressure cooker of social conflict. You had people constantly trying to one-up each other, scrambling for prominence and status in this brand new community. And this right here really breaks down the core conflict. On one side, you've got the values that were just fueling the chaos. These showy gifts, all about personal expression. Everyone's seeking the spotlight. It's all me, me, me. But then look at the other side. That's what the Apostle Paul is desperately trying to pull them back to. Unity, understandable communication, and this idea of building other people up. It's a total fundamental clash of values.
And the flashpoint for all this tension, it was this one spiritual gift, the gift of tongues. Now, because it looked and sounded so spectacular on the outside, people were using it to get status points. But the result was just confusion and division. So, and this is the key, Paul had to step in and basically hit the reset button on their entire value system.
And his solution? It was pretty radical. He drops chapter 13 in the middle of all this, not as some fluffy poem, but as the supreme ethical rule that was meant to regulate their behavior and hopefully pull them back together. Okay, now this is a key definition from our source material. And I know, it looks super academic, but hang with me for a second, because it's actually really powerful. Notice what's missing. The word feeling. Love isn't described as an emotion here at all. It's a cognitive adjustment, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a conscious, deliberate choice you make to line up your thoughts and actions with a shared set of values, all for the good of the whole community. So let's boil that down. For Paul, in this specific context, love isn't just a feeling that makes you act a certain way. Love is the behavior. It's how you manage the way you act toward other people. Simple as that. And this quote just nails it. Love doesn't make up its own rules as it goes along. Think of it like a tool. It takes the rules that are already there, the community's shared values, and it's the tool you use to apply them, to keep the community socially healthy. Okay, so Paul has just laid out this new definition of love as a practical, hands-on tool, and he does not waste a single second. The very next chapter, bam, he immediately puts it to work on the biggest source of chaos they had, their public worship services. So what he does is, he puts two gifts side by side. You've got prophecy, which is basically clear, understandable speech that builds up the entire church. And then you have tongues. Now sure, tongues might make the individual feel good, but if nobody else has a clue what you're saying, it does literally nothing for the community. And for Paul, the top priority is understandable communication that lifts everybody up. And he uses this brilliant musical analogy to make his point. He's like, look, even with a harp or a pipe, if you just play a bunch of random notes, how is anyone supposed to know what tune you're playing? It's not music, it's just noise. And he's arguing that communication is the exact same way. Without clarity, without distinction, it is totally useless to the person listening. Our source for this, Dr. Meadors, has this great modern story that's kind of the same idea. He talks about the first time he got an instrumental banjo album. He put it on, and he honestly thought it was broken, because every single song sounded exactly the same. Why? Well, because he hadn't learned the language of the banjo yet. He couldn't pick out the different notes. It's a perfect illustration, right? If your audience doesn't have the key to understand what you're saying, you're pretty much just making noise. And then Paul just drives this point home with this unforgettable, almost mic drop kind of statement. He says that in the church, he would rather speak just five intelligible words that actually instruct somebody than 10,000 words in a tongue that nobody understands. 5 versus 10,000. That's how massive the difference was for him. He valued clear,
community-building communication way, way more than any individual spectacle. And look, this wasn't just some abstract theoretical argument he was making. He gets super practical. Paul lays out concrete, step-by-step rules, all based on this principle of love, to get order back in the room.
And just look at how specific these rules are. One at a time, people. Only 2 or maybe 3 speakers, tops. And this is the big one. If there's no one there to interpret, then the speaker has to remain quiet, full stop. Why? Because the goal isn't your personal expression. The goal is making sure the entire church is built up.
And he grounds all of this in theology. He's saying, hey, the way you worship should reflect who God is. And God, he says, is not a God of disorder but of peace. So your community should reflect that order and peace, not chaos and confusion.
So, where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway when we put this super famous chapter back into its original kind of gritty context?
Well, here's the bottom line. 1 Corinthians 13 stops being just a poem, and it becomes the ultimate test. It's the ethical yardstick. It's the standard that every single action, every spiritual expression has to be measured against. The question becomes, does this build other people up? Is this for the good of the community? And if the answer is no, then it fails the test of love.
And understanding this doesn't make the chapter any less beautiful. I think it does the opposite. It actually makes it more powerful. It transforms it from just a lovely sentiment you'd hear at a wedding into this robust, practical, powerful tool for healing a community that was literally breaking apart.
And so that leaves us with a pretty pointed question, one that's just as relevant for us today as it was for them back then. When it all comes down to it, what's more important? What we experience as individuals or how we build up our community? Are we chasing the spectacular, flashy moment, or are we committed to the patient, sometimes difficult work of actually building one another up?